So I'd like to talk about the US encirclement of China and also pinpoint a little bit of South Korea's function in this. But before I do that, I want to point out that language really matters. The US is already at war with China, and it's being waged as hybrid warfare, or more specifically, information warfare. And a key dimension of this hybrid information warfare is language. So the first thing I want to point out is there's this thing called the fire hose of falsehoods, according to the RAND Corporation, and it talks about a propaganda model that it attributes to Russia, but it's actually what the United States itself is doing. This is psychological projection, as others have pointed out. So the key point is that before soldiers go to war, the language goes to war. And one of the things that's important to note is the US holds the field, and that is the fact that it's a legacy of imperial privilege, that we have to wage this contest of language largely even in this current moment within the English language. So there are key words that are being weaponized and used in this war of propaganda. But I want to go over some of them. Some have already been mentioned. One is the rules-based international order. This is a euphemism for US hegemonic power. There is the word threat. That is a euphemism for a country that does not subordinate itself to US hegemony. There is the term autocratic, which is a label which is used against any country that is not submissive to the United States. The counterposing term is democratic, which the US labels approvingly on subservient capitalist client states. There's the term anti-access area denial, which is simply a trumped-up military jargon for coastal defense or littoral defense or area defense. And the US considers China's defensive capacities, its A2AD capacities, as an existential threat to US forces and the freedom of navigation. There's something called a phone-op. It is a show of military force. It has nothing to do with freedom of navigation, although the original concept of the freedom of navigation, mare liberum, is actually a colonial concept counterposed to mare nostrum, which was used to justify colonial piracy. There's the term revisionist power, which was used in the national defense strategy, national security strategy to brand Russia and China. It's simply a trumped up euphemism for official enemy. There's the term competition the US likes. It simply means at war, and global competition means global war. And when the US says to compete and cooperate, it means that it will wage war with deceit. There's the term containment, which Ben has already very clearly explained. There's the term allies, which we could refer to or think of as client states, vassals, poodles, or the older, more colorful statement, running dogs. There's the term genocide, which is being used to apply to China's program of human development. And so the US claims there is a genocide going on in Xinjiang. There's actually a program of human development that increases the health, life expectancy, wealth, benefits, culture, education, and employment of a minority group. And of course, we cannot forget the verb zens, which should be widely used in the English language, just as, for example, the word bowdlerize. It means to lie, to concoct, to exaggerate by a factor of 1,000 or more, to invent facts, statistics, fraudulent documents with no basis in reality, based on a fundamentalist religious zealotry. Security means imperial interests. Shared liberal values means settler colonial white supremacy. So with that understanding, we look at these words, and now let's look at the map. Others have shown us many maps, but this is the map of encirclement. You can see the various bases, and you can see that it is very clearly an arc of containment. There are the island chains that others have mentioned. Most notably, South Korea recently built a base on Jeju Island, which nudges the island chain even closer. And the fact is that Biden is preparing for war with China. The question is not, is he going to prepare for war or engage in war? The question is how. And the question right now in the political class is it going to be ambidextrous, that is a two-front war against Russia and China? Is it going to be sequential, that is knock out Russia first and then pivot to China? Or will it be refocused, that is let the Europeans take care of Russia, the US must focus everything on China? And that also requires a casus belli. Now, there is a war doctrine that's been published in 2013. It was developed on since 2010, 2009. It accompanied the US pivot to Asia. And the air-sea battle doctrine is actually a revamping of the air-land battle doctrine against the USSR, which was the NATO's policy or NATO's doctrine of rollback against the USSR. Air-land battle was never directly used against the USSR, but it was applied during the Iraq War and all subsequent wars since the 90s. There's something called the third offset, which the US is working on, and it involves long-range standoff fires, which Ben has explained in detail. But it also involves autonomous warfare, subsurface warfare, dispersion swarming, and full-spectrum warfare across the entire spectrum. Just to go over the offsets, the first offset is mass, that is nuclear weapons, a bigger weapon against a conventional force. If you have a bigger weapon, more massive weapons, you can destroy the conventional force. The second offset, when both sides had massed nuclear weapons, was the second offset. The second offset was precision, that is precision cruise missiles that can knock out your enemy's massed weapons. The third offset, which is the offset against precision attacks, is dispersion. And that dispersion is combined with autonomous or AI-driven warfare. And so this is what the US is preparing in the South China Sea and against China, and to a certain extent against Russia right now. So we're escalating rapidly towards a shooting war. It's hybrid warfare. All domains are contested. It involves soft and hard power, state and non-state actors, conventional and non-conventional operations. And it engages the military, political, social, economic, infrastructural, informational domains, the cognitive domains, physical domains, informational domains, etc. South Korea's role in this? Well, South Korea is important because it's the sixth most powerful military in the world. It has the largest military manpower on the planet, probably around 3.5 million conscripted troops, if you include reserves. And the US, as Chu-hyun has pointed out, retains operational control over all South Korean troops. This is an important picture to note. The Korean person in front is a Korean lawmaker. The person behind him is Curtis J. Scaparotti, who was the US CNC USFK commander at the time, controlling all troops in South Korea. If you look at the pan-out, you'll realize that Kim Moo-sung, the Korean lawmaker, is actually being ridden by Curtis J. Scaparotti. I think that metaphor speaks for itself. South Korea is a client state. Donald P. Gregg said to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee that the US has always been a patron to Korea's client status. There have been various ceremonies of obeisance, including most recently, Yoon Suk-yeol at the UNGA had a 48-second drive-by summit with Biden, where he did not get anything he wanted. He drove up to the favor window of the White House, and he was given a big, fat, juicy nothing burger. And after having received that, he cursed out the US Congress, calling them FUCKERs, and said that Biden would be SHIT-faced, embarrassed because of this. But that's about the extent of South Korea's resistance, is a kind of potty mouth Lenny Bruce imitation. Yoon Suk-yeol, the South Korean president, wrote an article in Foreign Affairs just before his election, currying favor. and he essentially gave US foreign policy back to the United States on a silver platter. If you read the language, strategic alliance, free and open inclusive order in the Indo-Pacific, quadrilateral security dialogue, coordination with the US and Japan, he essentially cut and paste US State Department doctrine and then fed it back to the United States on a silver platter. Under most circumstances, this would be considered plagiarism and would be kicked out of the House. This is more of Ewan. He also made a statement about the alliance, growing threats to the rules-based international order. He says the alliance has grown far beyond the Korean Peninsula, meaning that it will get involved in US war over Taiwan. Explicit, comprehensive participation of South Korea in US war against China in all war fighting domains and in all potential conflict areas. So the fat in the pan is smoking. The random rage killings, as Lillian has pointed out, signal that things have crossed a threshold. You can see the escalation in attacks. They're happening all over the world. It's inseparable from the warmongering on China. A wholesale policy of hate mongering will trickle down into retail violence, and Asians are collateral damage of this hate mongering. How would the United States fight China? It is certainly a hybrid war. It involves economic war, tech war, fiscal warfare, legal warfare, diplomatic warfare, military brinksmanship, civil subversion, academic warfare. And we also have to ask ourselves the question, well, what is all of this about? Why is the US at war with China? Of course, we can go back to Martin Luther King's three evils: militarism, empire, materialism, capitalism, and racism, of course. And we can also track the development of this from the Defense Planning Guidance document to the current Biden Indo-Pacific strategy. But if we want to name some of the people, we can name Andrew Marshall, who was the model for Dr. Strangelove. He cultivated essentially what we call the neocons. He was obsessed with military supremacy against the Soviet Union and then against China. These are some of his proteges: Wolfowitz, Cheney, Cohen, Pillsbury, Richard Pearl. And also these combined with the Blue Team members, such as Robert Kagan, Nancy Pelosi, Peter Navarro, etc. They're a known group of people. Andrew Krapinovich was the person who drafted Air-Sea Battle. Frank Gaffney was the person who stated that there was no hope of coexistence with China. And of course, Paul Wolfowitz drafted the Defense Planning Guidance document, which became the Project for the New American Century, which became the Pivot to Asia, which became Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama's plan to encircle China. It came with an explicit doctrine of war, as well as an explicit economic doctrine. And so you can see DPG, PNAC, Bush Doctrine, Obama Doctrine, Trump Doctrine, Biden Doctrine. And of course, the Blue Team, which are holdovers from the 1990s against Taiwan. Nancy Pelosi is one of the key members of them. She said of the Hong Kong riots when people were being burned alive that it was a beautiful sight to behold. So it goes from the Heartland Theory, the grand chess game of Brzezinski, to Wolfowitz, to the Project for a New American Century, to the Center for a New American Security and the Pivot to Asia. Or you can understand it as US exceptionalism, the DPG, the Pivot to Asia, the Trump Doctrine, and the IPEF and the Indo-Pacific Strategy. The offset, as I said before, is mass, precision, dispersion, automated warfare, long-range standoff missiles. This is the island chain. Taiwan Island is important because of China's chiastic history. It wants to complete its revolution, but it's also a pawn on the seventh row of the chessboard, and the US has trampled on all red lines regarding Taiwan Island. The Taiwan Policy Act is the latest instigation, and essentially it says that strategic ambiguity over Taiwan Island is over. The trick is to provoke war. The US wants to goad war into what they hope will be a limited war over Taiwan. The Taiwan Policy Act puts that into legislative form. It prepares economic and financial sanctions against China preemptively. It fast tracks weapons and training. It rehearses war games, and most of all, interoperability. It gives Taiwan Island non-NATO ally status. It gives $6.5 billion worth of arms and support. And note the long title of this act. It is a bill to support the security of Taiwan and its right of self-determination. Can you imagine if China wrote a bill sending arms and weapons and training and ensuring the right of self-determination of Guam, Hawaii, Texas, or California? So these are cruel, clear, undeniable departures from the status quo and the one China principle. They want to destabilize China, set back the country. They want to push China into a limited war over Taiwan. The Strategy of Denial is a book written by Elbridge Colby, who was one of the key authors of the US National Defense Strategy. He says, escalating Taiwan tensions into a conflict gives the US a chance at winning, unlike a Cold War arms race, which the US would lose hands down. That China must be provoked into initiating the aggression so that it looks as the aggressor. Part of this is the Japan-Korea-US trilateral alliance. The US needs Japan and Korea to do the heavy lifting in the Northeast Asia. I refer to it as JACUS, similar to AUKUS. It's a shotgun wedding because China, Japan, and Korea have actually, apart from their colonial legacy, they have serious conflicts with each other, largely the comfort women, the enslavement, and the colonial history. This is a picture of the Empress Myeongsong, who the Japanese killed as they were colonizing Korea. They actually went into the imperial palace, gang raped her, set her on fire while she was alive. The pivot to Asia is all about encirclement. Yoon says that he wants to be part of this pivot. We can understand the pivot as, if we look at a topologist map of the world, which only shows connections, we can see that the top 3/4 is the Eurasian continent, which can be connected by land through rail. It becomes a solid force. The bottom 4th is the Americas. Oxford geographer Halford Mackinder referred to this as the heartland theory. He said, who rules Eurasia commands the heartland, who rules the heartland commands the destiny of the planet. This was taken in by Brzezinski and then adopted by Paul Wolfowitz, and then incorporated into the pivot to Asia. If you look at the Shanghai Cooperative Organization, you can see that it is exactly the total coverage of the Eurasian continent as Halford Mackinder conceived it. There is a little white spot there, that's the Caspian Sea. This is the Belt and Road. China is considered to be an existential threat to rules-based order, etc., what have you. There's constant public threat invasion. It's a threat to the global order, despite the fact it has had the most peaceful rise of any great power in world history. As I said, China is not a threat. It's not a threat to your freedom. It's not a nuclear threat. It's not a threat to your lifestyle. It's certainly not a threat to Hillary Clinton's grandchildren, as she seems to think it is. But it is an economic threat. Multipolarity is a threat. Choice is a threat. It's an ideological threat like Cuba, Haiti, Venezuela, North Korea, Nicaragua, and China itself. It's a threat to the Western capitalist system, which is built—
you could wrap up soon.
Yes, very rapidly, which is built on extraction. It's a threat to geostrategic. The US wants to take down China. It's a threat the way that Tamar Rice was a threat to the police. It's a threat the way that the My Lai babies were a threat to Paul Medlow when he massacred them in the ditch. It's essentially a parasite sees a host's effort to free itself as an existential threat. And therefore, the first thing is the host must realize that it is attached to the parasite, and then it has to detach the parasite. In the case of Korea, that means return of sovereignty, OPCON, de-escalation with North Korea, and mutual security and win-win with Asian countries. We know what war on the peninsula looks like. We know what it looks like in Asia. We have to work for peace. Despair is not an option.